The mail-order husband arrived clad in rags that clung to his angular frame like the last scraps of dignity he possessed. Yet the rancher's daughter, Maggie Rayner, glimpsed something beneath the threadbare coat that made her heart falter, a flicker of purpose she had almost stopped believing could exist in a man. The train screeched into Stillwater with a banshee wail of metal grinding against rusted rails, belching a thick column of smoke that blurred the lines between sky and earth. Maggie stood at the far edge of the platform, her worn leather boots rooted firmly on the warped planks, the frayed hem of her riding skirt stirring up the dust that never seemed to settle in this corner of Texas. The sun, merciless and glaring, bore down on her until her scalp prickled beneath her straw hat. She squinted into the swirling haze, her heart drumming an unsteady rhythm against the tight laces of her corset. It was the spring of 1869. For years since the war had officially ended, though the memory of cannon fire and the hollowed faces of the defeated clung to every porch and pasture like a sickness no sermon could cure. The land had turned lean and stubborn. The cattle her father once counted by the hundreds now reduced to a straggling herd, fences sagging like old men's shoulders. The men who returned from the fighting brought no silver or promise, only the 1,000-yard stare of those who had buried more friends than they could name. She had dressed with care that morning, tidy but not desperate, practical yet still with a trace of softness, because her father always insisted that first impressions carried weight. But this meeting was never about pleasantries or the hope of courtship. It was about survival. She was waiting for Eli Turner, the man who had answered her advertisement with letters that were sparse but earnest, words etched in a careful hand. I am a man of the land. I do not speak much, but I work hard. I have no kin, only my hands and the will to put them to use. She had conjured an image of him in her mind. A man quiet but resolute, shoulders weathered by storms yet unbowed, someone warm but honorable. When he stepped down from the train, she felt the breath catch in her throat. He was taller than she had pictured, yet so thin his coat hung from his bones like a scarecrow's rags. His boots were split open at the seams, his hair shaggy, beard uneven as if he'd sheared with a hunting knife in the dark. A single battered satchel was slung over his shoulder. That was all he owned. But it was his eyes that struck her most. Not vacant but hollowed, the gaze of a man who had stood over too many fresh graves and forgotten how it felt to look at the living without guilt. He spotted her at once, and without the slightest hesitation, he started toward her. On instinct, she took a step back. He stopped no more than 2 feet away. His voice was low, almost hoarse when he spoke. Maggie Rayner? She swallowed, the heat surging into her cheeks. Good Lord, you're Eli Turner? He nodded once, his eyes dropping as if he already knew the shape of her disappointment. Around them, townsfolk slowed their errands, glancing over crates of produce and bundles of laundry to stare at the stranger who looked like he had crawled straight out of some unmarked grave. She heard the whispers ripple across the platform, one man muttering by the pump, "Looks like he died and forgot to lie down," while a woman leaned close to her companion and murmured, "She wrote to that?" A flush of anger and something perilously close to fear crept up Maggie's throat. This gaunt, ragged figure was not the man she had summoned with her letters. She opened her mouth to speak, but found no words, only the raw ache of uncertainty. The silence stretched until it seemed to smother the space between them. At last, she looked him over again. His hands were rough and cracked, fresh and old scars crisscrossing his knuckles. His spine was straight, though he carried himself like someone who had to remind his body how to stand tall. A soldier once, or perhaps only a wanderer. Definitely not a liar, she realized, just a man worn down to the last scrap of himself. He exhaled, the sound low and raw, before she could lose her nerve. "Get in the wagon," she said, and he obeyed without a flicker of protest. They rode away from Stillwater in a silence, so complete it felt as if words themselves had been scoured out by the wind. The old cart jolted over ruts and gullies, its wheels complaining with every turn. Overhead, the sky was a vast, unforgiving blue, stretching without mercy in all directions. Prairie grass rippled out to the horizon and dry, golden waves that looked like the edges of some ancient, half-erased map. Maggie clutched the reins tighter than necessary, her knuckles pale. In her mind, a litany of doubts churned. This is a mistake. He's too thin, too worn. He looks like a man already halfway in the grave. But underneath the panic, a quieter voice rose. Her father's voice, worn by years but steady as bedrock. A man's worth ain't what he wears, Maggie. It's what he carries when no one else is watching. She stole a glance at Eli. He sat utterly still, one hand resting lightly on the wagon's splintered side, the other clenched in his lap, as if bracing for impact. His gaze never strayed to her or to the endless sky. It fixed straight ahead, unwavering. The question escaped her before she could stop herself, her voice rougher than she meant it to be. "Why did you answer my letter?" For a long moment, he didn't move. She thought maybe he hadn't heard. Her. But then he spoke, the words quiet, shaped by something older than regret. "Because you wrote like someone who wouldn't give up. And I thought maybe I could remember how to be that kind of man." The confession cracked something in her chest. She looked away, blinking hard. They said nothing more as the miles passed under the mule's plodding hooves. When the Rayner ranch finally emerged from the shimmering haze of dust, fences sagging, the windmill turning with a forlorn squeal, fields dry and wanting, she did not tell him to keep riding. Instead, she handed him the iron key to the bunkhouse, her palm trembling only slightly. She showed him where the tools were kept, pointed out the pump behind the barn, and as the wind picked up, hurling grit around them in tiny, stinging gusts, Maggie Rayner made her choice. Not because he looked strong. God knew he didn't. But because something inside her, something too stubborn to die, recognized something in him. Broken, yes, but still breathing. Still willing. And perhaps, despite everything, worth saving. The wagon rocked and creaked over the broken dirt road as the mule set a slow, dog pace. Maggie kept her jaw tight, her gaze locked on the road unspooling before them. Behind her, Eli rode like a statue carved out of the war itself, his silhouette dark against the waning light. The prairie stretched endless, its grasses whispering secrets too old for any living ear. He hadn't asked a single question, hadn't complained about the cart's rattling or the mule's limp. It was as though he had learned to expect nothing, to need nothing. Again, she wondered what kind of man answered a stranger's letter with nothing but a promise to help. When she finally dared to glance back, he sat with his hands folded, eyes lowered to the planks at his feet. The last glow of the sun burnished the horizon to copper and carved his gaunt figure into something almost spectral, a ghost heading west. They reached the ranch just before dusk. The place looked exhausted. Fences bowed under their own weight, the barn roof sagging like an old man's spine. Near the cottonwood at the far edge of the yard lay her father's grave, marked only by a river stone and a rusted horseshoe. Eli stepped down from the wagon, removed his hat, and inclined his head to the simple marker. Then he followed her to the bunkhouse without a word. "You can stay here," she told him, her voice steady despite the turmoil beneath it. "It's spare, but it's clean. I'll bring you supper." He nodded, his eyes never quite meeting hers. "Thank you." That night, after supper eaten mostly in silence, Maggie lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. The wind tapped the window panes like hesitant fingers, the hush pressing on her, too big and too loud all at once. Who is he? She wondered. What has he survived? And what has it turned him into? What sort of man carries nothing, but moves like he's walked through fire? Restless, she rose and wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. Barefoot, she crossed the yard to the bunkhouse. Inside, the lamp was dark, the air still and cool. Eli lay on the cot, his back to the door. At the foot of the bed rested his small satchel. Just one look, she told herself, though the plea sounded weak even in her own mind. Just to understand. She eased the satchel open. Inside, she found a neatly folded change of clothes, a battered canteen, and beneath the shirt, a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Her hands shook as she unwrapped it. Letters. Her letters. Every envelope she had ever sent him. Carefully kept. Some pages water-stained, others mended with wax. She noticed faint pencil notations in the margins, small comments he had never shared. She unfolded the first letter, the words almost unrecognizable for how far away they felt. "I do not know your name, but if you serve and have no place to return to, my land can give you work. And if you are kind, maybe company too. on the back, in that same rough, cramped hand. Your words are first I've read in weeks that were not orders or death notices. I do not know if I am kind, but I have nothing else left to be. Her chest constricted. She read more. Each letter bore an unsent reply, written as if he'd hoped she would discover them someday. When she reached the one dated just after Cold Harbor, she had to sit down. If I survive Cold Harbor, I will come find you. But if I do not grieve me. You already saved the only part of me worth keeping. Her vision blurred. She drew a ragged breath and pressed a bundle to her chest. This was no stranger. This was a man who had walked alone for years, carrying every word she had ever trusted him with. She rewrapped the letters and set them carefully back in the satchel. For a moment, she simply stood there, watching the quiet rise and fall of his breathing. One of his hands lay open on the blanket, as if waiting for something he had never dared to expect. Her voice came out a whisper, soft and unsteady. You came back. You kept them all. And in that moment, for the first time since she had laid her father beneath the cottonwood, Maggie Rayner did not feel alone. He hadn't dreamed in years, not since Cold Harbor. But that night, lying on the narrow cot in the bunkhouse, with the scent of dry earth and old letters filling the darkness, sleep overtook him heavier than it ever had before. When it came, it did not creep in gently. It flooded him in violent surges. Memories not in soft fragments, but in the full, unrelenting weight of June 1864. Virginia soil churned to mud and blood. Smoke, so thick it turned daylight to nightmare. Cannon fire cracked in the air until the world was nothing but noise and terror. The cries of men rose and fell between the shriek of bugles, commands that sounded more like a final judgment. Eli Turner was 23 years old. He could shoot the eye off a squirrel at 50 paces. They had called him Long Shot, half in jest, half in reverence, because his rifle never missed. But in war, there was no honor in a perfect aim, no glory in never failing to kill. Of marksmanship, it was a graveyard for men who carried more than bullets. His older brother Isaac had stood beside him in every battle until Cold Harbor. That morning, they had crouched behind a tangle of Confederate earthworks, the sun already too hot for May, their uniforms soaked in sweat and gunpowder. Isaac had said that when this one was over, they would go west, find land, grow something that did not kill. Eli had nodded. It was the first time either of them had spoken of a future. An hour later, Isaac was dead. A Union shell had struck too close, shattering timber, earth, and bodies in a single screaming second. Eli had crawled to him, bloody and broken, and tried to stop the bleeding with shaking hands. I am fine. Isaac had gasped, eyes already glassy. You keep going. Find her. Oh. Eli had stammered, the letter girl. He had not understood then, not fully, but in Isaac's coat pocket later, folded twice and blood spattered, he found a letter with Maggie Rayner's name on it. The envelope was unopened. A spare copy Isaac had carried not for himself but for his younger brother, who would never admit he needed words like that. Eli had been wounded in the leg by shrapnel later that day. He spent 2 weeks in a makeshift field hospital, no morphine, just whiskey and thread. He did not cry, not from pain, not from loss. The tears had gone dry somewhere between the trench and the tree line. When the war ended, he walked south, not toward home, for there was none, but away from everything that bore his name. Years passed. Towns came and went. He picked up work where he could, chopping wood, shoeing horses, harvesting cotton for a man who never looked him in the eye. He never stayed longer than a season, and all the while the letters stayed in his satchel. Every time he read one, he heard Isaac's voice. Find her. She needs someone who stays. Luther spit in the dirt and walked away. That night, Maggie set a bowl of stew before Eli and said softly, You didn't have to say anything. I know, he replied, but I meant every word. They sat across from each other. No smiles, but the silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt like home. The sun hung low and hot over the western hills as Maggie guided the cattle across the upper pasture. The grass there was higher, greener, one of the few parts of the land that still remember how to grow. Eli rode a few paces behind her, quiet as always, his eyes scanning the ridge. The herd moved slow but steady, the soft clinking of their bells lulling the afternoon into something near peaceful. Then came the sound, sharp and strange, a pounding not from the herd. A wild horse, black as coal and thick with muscle, burst from behind the mesquite. It charged, ears flat, eyes wide with madness. Maggie's horse reared. She clung to the saddle, struggling to hold on. The stallion had caught scent of the herd and gone into a frenzy. It lunged toward Maggie, hoofs thrashing. She froze. Everything slowed. The roar of blood in her ears, the flare of dust around the beast's legs, the sheer unthinking terror gripping her chest. And then Eli. He was off his horse, sprinting. She saw him out of the corner of her eye, moving faster than she thought possible. Just as the stallion's front legs came crashing down, Eli dove. His body slammed into hers, knocking her clear. The horse's hoof struck his back. He hit the ground hard, rolled once, and lay still. Maggie scrambled to her feet. Dirt caked to her palms, her dress torn at the side. The wild horse had bolted already, a blur on the far side of the hill. But Eli did not move. "No," she whispered, crawling toward him. "No, no, please, Eli, please." She turned him over. His eyes were shut, blood seeping to the back of his shirt. "Do not do this," she begged, pressing her hands to his chest. "You stupid, brave man. Do not." His eyes flickered, then opened. He wince coughed and whispered, "Is the horse gone?" Maggie let out a shaky laugh, half sob, half relief. "Yes, it is gone." He tried to sit up, groaned, and collapsed again. "Stay still," she ordered, voice trembling. "You took the damn hit from me." Eli looked at her, his face pale. "You are not supposed to get hurt. That is not your choice," she snapped. "You do not get to throw yourself at danger and think I will be fine watching you bleed." His eyes searched hers. "Why would it matter, Maggie? I am no one." She swallowed hard. "You are not no one." A beat, then another. He spoke again, voice hoarse. "You really think someone like you belongs with someone like me?" She stared at him, anger and fear giving way to something deeper. Her hand reached for his, rough, calloused, cracked with sun and labor. "I think you are the only man I have ever met who read my words and made them matter." He blinked. She continued, her voice steady now. "You never answered my letters, but you carried them. You kept them safe. You lived by them. And when I needed you, you came." Eli looked away. Maggie gently turned his face back. "You think you are low-born, that you are less than, but I have seen you climb roofs in storms, save calves from death, and dive in front of a wild beast for someone who once was a stranger." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You are not less, Eli. You are the only man who ever made me feel more." Something broke in his expression. Not pain, not pride, something like release. "I thought I was just surviving," he said softly. "Turns out I was waiting." Maggie squeezed his hand. "Well, I am here, and I am not letting go." Small ring. The copper had dulled, the shape uneven, but it was unmistakably crafted with care, hand-forged from a spent bullet casing. The wind rustled the grass around them, the sound soft like breath between words never spoken. And for the first time, Eli did not look like a man carrying a grave. He looked like someone who had finally found a place to rest. The clouds broke open with the fury of a war drum. Rain poured from the heavens in angry sheets, drumming against the tin roof of the barn and soaking the red earth within seconds. Thunder cracked like a rifle shot over the Rayner Ranch, and the wind howled across the fields, tugging at every loose board, every forgotten shingle. Inside the tool shed, Eli was sorting nails, boards, and hammerheads, his mind already calculating the repairs they would need come morning. The storm had rolled in faster than forecast. He had only stepped away for 5 minutes. Outside, Maggie had gone to check the cattle shed, stubborn as ever, refusing to wait for him to return. She spotted it then, one of the tin sheets on the roof, peeling up with each gust, a corner already flapping loose like a flag surrendering to the wind. Her heart jumped. If that panel tore free, the whole roof could go. The newborn calves inside would be soaked, exposed, vulnerable. She grabbed the ladder leaning against the fence, dragged it into position, and climbed, teeth clenched against the wind's bite. Rain slicked the rungs. Her dress caught on a nail. She tugged free, crawled onto the roof, and reached for a corner of the tin sheet. It bucked like a living thing in her hands. Down below, Eli stepped out of the shed, rain soaking his shoulders. He froze. His eyes shot to the roof. The field, the panel ripped from her grip, the hammer slipped from her hand. And then her boot slid. Her body lurched backward. She was falling. Below her lay jagged debris, including a broken fence post sharpened like a pike by the storm. Eli dropped everything and ran. Time slowed, the world narrowing to that one moment, that one cry, that one impossible chance. He slid across the slick ground, arms wide to catch her. The impact knocked the wind from both of them, and they rolled into the wet hay, mud splashing around them. Maggie lay half atop Eli, his arms locked around her like iron. The broken post stabbed the dirt inches from her skull. She gasped, breath shaky, heart hammering. Eli's chest rose and fell beneath her, fast and uneven. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of rain filled the air. Her hand clutched his shirt, soaking wet, clinging to him as if he were the only thing holding her to the earth. She finally looked up. You caught me." He nodded, eyes shut. "Why?" she asked, voice raw. His voice came low, strained. "Do not ever do something like that again. Not without me." "I had to," she said, voice cracking. "This place is my life." He opened his eyes and stared at her. "You are mine." Her breath caught. "Since the first letter," he said softly. "You have been home to me." She pressed her forehead against his, her soaked hair clinging between them. "Then do not let go," she whispered. "I won't," he said, voice no louder than the rain. The next day dawned calm. The storm had passed, but the damage was clear. The shed roof was half torn away. A fence collapsed, but no lives were lost, no calves missing, no blood spilled. At least not this time. Maggie brought a bundle of cloth to the barn, her boots splashing in shallow puddles. Eli was inside, reinforcing the gate with salvage beam, his shirt clinging to his back, muscles taut as he worked in silence. She stepped in. He turned, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. Maggie held out the cloth. He took it carefully and unwrapped it. Inside was a strip of deep green silk, old and worn, her father's neckcloth, the one he wore only on the most sacred days, the one that had draped his coffin. Eli looked up, questioning. "You saved me," Maggie said. "You saved this ranch. That cloth belonged to a man who kept this place alive. I think it belongs to the man who keeps it breathing now." Eli stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat pocket. From it, he pulled a